I'm Julie Sawai. I'm the co-founder of Needed, and this is Needed Conversations.
Hey, Julie. This is Dr. Chopra. We need to talk.
Let's do this. I'm so excited to have you with us today. Thank you for being here.
I'm so happy to be here.
Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Dr. Deepika Chopra. I am known as the Optimism Doctor. I specialize and study in the science behind optimism and resiliency and joy. I'm also a visual imagery expert and the founder of the Things Are Looking Up brand. Oh, I'm a mom.
A mom.
of three kids.
A mom to three. Yeah, we have that in common.
We do.
That's
and our
amazing.
littles are like not too far off.
They're not too far off. Yeah. That's wonderful. Well, we're so excited to have you here today. I'm personally excited to have this conversation. I feel like I think of myself as an optimistic person and a resilient person. That optimism and resilience has certainly been tested this year. And, for many of us who are here in LA, that's true. But why don't we start off with, I would just love to understand, you've really built your career around optimism, but it's not the type of optimism, the like happy-go-lucky optimism that many people think about. So I would love for you to just unpack what optimism means to you and really the science behind optimism that you've built your career around.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I actually feel optimism as a notion is probably one of the more misunderstood sort of concepts. And it's truly a passion of mine to help redefine that and bring it back down to sort of the real science. And, it's interesting. When I'm speaking to a large audience, I'll always ask people, what do you think optimism means, or like name out loud like the first word that comes to mind when you think of optimism. And it's like a resounding echo of like positivity. And it makes sense. But I think most people are pretty sort of surprised to hear that someone that is the optimism doctor is saying that positivity is probably like word 3, 4, 5 on my list. And the first two words that really come to my mind very clearly when I'm thinking about optimism are resiliency and curiosity. And so the way I define a optimistic person or someone that is leaning towards optimism is someone that is truly aware and mindful of the setbacks and the less than ideal situations and the roadblocks. But the caveat there is that they see those things as temporary and something that they have the ability to overcome, even if they don't know how or when. And so it's really built upon this idea of perseverance and resiliency. And I sort of like to look at it, I think most people, when they think about someone and they think about optimism, they're sort of thinking about rose-colored glasses and silver linings, and the glass is always half full. And, I think things like good vibes only start to come in. And, all these things are wonderful things, but we start to really tread into the water of like toxic positivity and real optimism in the way in which I define and work with it is so different than that. And I sort of like to look at it as, being in an optimistic state is sort of being really fully in whatever emotional state you're in. So if you are in a worry state, or you're fearful, or you're in anger or mourning or loss, or any of these feelings, which by the way, as humans, we were meant to feel the full range of human emotion. And so all those things are normal. So it's normalizing those feelings, but it's not being paralyzed by them. And it's being true to them and authentic to them and sitting in them. Like you have to sit in them. But it's almost like I'm a visual person, so I see it as sort of like looking in the distance, and depending on where you are in your optimistic, journey, it's like seeing a door. Yeah. There's a door there. I don't know what's behind it. I may not know, but I know there's a door, which means there's something on the other side. Or maybe at some point, like you see the door's unlocked. Maybe there's a crack open. Maybe it becomes wide open. And so it's like sitting in your true emotional state, but leaving room for hope.
Right.
And that's optimism.
Right. Yeah. That's just like a profound, it resonates so much with the experience that my family and I have been going through of late. We lost our home in the LA fires I know you were also deeply affected by that, and many in your community. And I think that is something that's so misunderstood about optimism. Is it's either this like, are you naive in thinking that like bad things won't happen, or just kind of failing to understand that you can hold both the good and the bad. That it doesn't. You don't have to only focus on the good to be an optimistic person, that there's a time and a place to hold space for the hard.
Yes.
But to your point, to know that it's temporary, that it's not, you're not stuck in the negative.
I mean, first of all, I'm so deeply sorry about your loss. Yes, we were impacted, but we were not impacted in that way. Our house still remains, and you never know what someone's truly going through. And this is a lesson that I feel like personally, I'm just like continuously taught, but also professionally. We make assumptions in the process of, we can really tangibly understand when someone loses something like a person or, part of their identity. And now we understand like the loss of a home. But I think a lot of times people sort of are just like, I'm so glad, like you should be happy that thank God you're safe and you're alive. And of course there's that. Or even for us in art, I felt a lot of guilt because, we went through a lot as well. And there's a lot that has happened for us over this year with health issues with, one of my kids. And then there was just so much disruption, and, we weren't in our home and we had to leave our community, and much around our community is gone. Yeah. And but I was like, but we didn't lose our home. And so we could go back for our stuff. And I was driving my 4-year-old, and he just welled up and he was silent for a bit. And I kind of looked in my rear view mirror and he was completely bawling. And I said, what's wrong? And he said, so we're never going back to our house again. And I just, it sort of struck me a little bit because, you think like, oh, they're young. And then he said, which I thought gave me so much empathy for my friends and my family members that had lost their home and their things. He said, so I'll never see my bed again. And what about, this stuffed animal? And what about that chair in my room? And what about that? And he started like, it was about, for him, it was about the things that surrounded him. And it just really struck me. So, all to say that it's just grief can look really different for people, and it's processing a loss, something that's different, and it can be something physical, it can be a relationship, it can be entering motherhood into a new identity, a part of you. And so I think that the experience of life is very humbling. It's humbling personally, and for me it's really humbling professionally.
Yeah. Wow. We've had a very similar kind of experience with our daughter. I have 3 kids, 2 of whom are old enough to kind of understand what has happened. The youngest, thankfully, is a little baby who will never really know other than through our stories about what happened. But it's been really interesting seeing, like, processing it alongside them or seeing how they process it. And in many ways, I feel like it has allowed, it's like the kids bring me optimism. They make me feel, hopeful.
Yes.
They bring the hope for me of, we can't dwell too much on what we lost because we have them. But at the same time, I see like, there's days where my oldest daughter just seems like she's struggling. We had one of those nights a few nights ago, and it's clear that she just doesn't have the vocabulary to express, like, that she just misses home. She does not want to be in this rental house that we're in. And we're, it's, to your point, it's very easy to go to the toxic positivity. We're lucky to have a rental house. We're lucky to have had insurance and all of the things that have unfolded in our favor since this happened. But it's not healthy to fail to acknowledge that we did lose a lot.
Yes.
And it's that maybe the loss of the safety or the unexpected nature of it that makes it so challenging. And the finality, like you were speaking about, of like, it's an ending that none of us asked for.
No, and I think you hit the nail on the head, especially for our kids. It's this idea of a loss of security.
Yeah.
Something that they always thought would be there, that they took sort of not for granted, but what we took for granted.
Too. Yeah.
Of course. And it's not something that you necessarily could prepare for.
Right.
And it's more than stuff. It's a feeling.
Yeah.
I think that, you bring something up, and when I work with parents and myself being a parent, I think it's so important to remind ourselves that, when we're in it with our kids, with their emotions, like to remind ourselves that we are not there. They are not asking us to fix their emotions or to necessarily come up with a solution to, make them happy. What they need is like a safe space to just process. Mm-hmm. And their processing looks different than ours. Sometimes it is full of vocabulary and other times it's not.
Yeah.
And so I think that, in processing, I think that the same for mine, even though it's a different situation, like when he reacted in that way, I had realized I really hadn't given him any space to process it, because I kind of just imagined there wasn't much for him to process, which was so naive of me.
It's a nuanced loss, but it's still a loss. It's still a grief over half of your life or maybe more, being in this community that's not there, and having this transition that, I think none of us ever could have anticipated. It's hard to fathom the like scope of the loss. I think in my life, and I've been through other things in my life that have led me to build resilience and to probably harness optimism in a way, but not on the scale of this like community-wide loss.
And sort of that uncertainty of scrambling too. Like where, for a lot of my friends, not only did they lose their homes, but they lost their schools.
Yeah.
And pretty much everything. Yeah. So it's that scramble too in the middle of this year of like, where do we go?
My daughter's school was in the Palisades, and the physical campus is standing. It needs some remediation, but it's fared better than many of the other schools in the Palisades have. They've relocated to Santa Monica in the meantime, and it's in an office building, and it's a very different environment. But you see I think it just really shows you like what matters. At least for me, it's really not, yes, it was a beautiful setting where she was at school, but the teachers are there and they're so happy to be there, and the parents are so happy to see the kids in school. The kids are so happy to be with the people who like love them and with their friends that honestly they almost seem unaffected.
Yeah.
They're just so, there is such a hope, of being back together. And I think a sense of community that, was felt before, but is even more so felt now.
Oh, yeah. And I always tell people, I think it's counterintuitive, but we actually build our optimism. And now that you all know what the definition is, it's probably a lot easier to understand that. But we cultivate and build our optimism through like struggle and through community and resiliency. We don't necessarily build our optimism through 24/7 bliss, which by the way doesn't exist. But, it is in those places that we build that optimism from. And so, it's for you to have, I heard you say, I hadn't gone through something like to this scope, but I've gone through stuff before and I feel like I've built resiliency from it. And all I can say is the amount of resiliency you'll be building from this is monumental and will just be part in the fabric makeup of your optimism journey. Like that's where it's built. Yeah. Not to say we want struggle. Nobody does, but none of us are immune to it.
Right. The way you describe optimism as somewhat of like a function of life experience or lived experience makes me wonder if optimism is it something that is it a personality trait? Is it an outlook on life? And to that end, as both of us are mothers and thinking about, the future of our children, is it something that can be taught to kids?
Absolutely. Optimism, I actually don't look at it as a personality trait. I look at it as a muscle. I think optimism is a muscle, and we have the ability to work that muscle out and to make it stronger. I think it's a really interesting concept because when I heard you talking about that, I started to immediately think like, yes, it is a product of life experience, but our kids are so optimistic probably because they don't have as much life experience. So it works in both ways. Like we build our resiliency, and that's a place of optimism. But obviously, our kids and the way they see the world is such an inspiration because they're not coming with a lot of the notions or sort of life lived experience of the things that we might have come with that have sort of jaded us in some ways. And so it really is this like yin and yang, and we get it from both. There is a genetic component to people that are more naturally optimistic, but it's actually not as big as we thought it was. So I've seen various studies, and they sort of don't all agree on the exact number, but the highest I've ever seen the genetic component is like 23%, 25%. So the remainder is learned.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important. I certainly would not be doing what I'm doing if there was no component of being able to learn it. But yes, optimism can be learned, and I think it needs to be learned. So I think it's important to say that, you know, from an evolutionary standpoint, we were probably more sort of keyed in to be more pessimistic, you know, way back.
Anticipating what could go wrong.
And way back when we lived in a world where, you know, there were saber-toothed tigers and we were out hunting and gathering. We had to imagine the worst case scenario to stay out of death. And those of the people that were able to do that, they lived and they passed that trait on and so on. But the modern world that we live in today, it is no longer something that research shows us that if we are chronically imagining worst case scenario, that we are faring not even any better, but we're not thriving.
Right.
So I think that the other thing about it is that nobody is an optimist and nobody is a pessimist. It exists on a continuum. And a lot of times what I do with people is really find out and measure, like, how optimistic are they in certain aspects of their life. And so for me, I'm naturally optimistic in a number of different aspects in my life. But there's one aspect of my life where I am so naturally pessimistic, probably more so than anyone I've met, at least in my own little microcosm of family. And that to me is my health, or health in general. I'm definitely on the side of a hypochondriac. I am neurotic about health stuff. I immediately go to the pessimistic side. And sometimes I've been validated for it. Like, I'm not well, let's just wait and see.
Right.
I'm like, I don't have all the information. I'm very keenly aware that something's going on. I'm going to the doctor. And many times it's just validated me to continue to do that. But that's kind of where my Achilles heel is. That's where my work lies in the optimism. It's not all bad. And most of the time it's not. But that's where my mind goes.
Right.
And
it's probably like it's a protective mechanism that there's a reason your brain wants to think about that to save you from pain or save you from, in the most extreme case, from death.
Yeah, I think so. But it also is something that is irrational in a lot of ways, and something that I work on because it does get in the way.
Yeah.
And it's something I want to work on and I don't want to project onto my kids. But that's my and everyone has that. So instead of looking at sort of optimism as where do you fall on it as either an optimist or a pessimist, and were you born that way? And it's more like, how optimistic are you in these certain
spheres?
Certain spheres, and also seasons. So, I mean, talk about becoming a parent. People always ask me, you know, with optimism, like, how did becoming a parent, did that impact that at all? Yeah, in some ways you're looking at the future. And I think on a philosophical way, it has made me so much more optimistic. And to your point, when things are really tough, I think my kids are definitely a sense of optimism for me, especially globally, when things are tough. But actually, I'd say becoming a parent has made optimism more challenging for me in my daily life. It's made me worry more. It's increased my anxiety. The things I play out in my head in terms of worst case scenarios are far more common since becoming a parent. And again, things that it just gives me more to work on, which I know now through my work is sort of what life is about and the purpose of life. Yeah. So I guess bring it on. Yeah.
It's like becoming a parent and being a parent. It's like it's confronting with your own
Yes.
fears. And then I think also the stakes feel higher too. It's like
way higher.
You know, if something happens to me, that's one thing. But if it happens to my child, that's, you know, it's a much scarier prospect.
Yes, absolutely.
What you were sharing about earlier as it relates to the kind of like survival mechanism brain of avoiding things around the corner made me think about like the state of mind that we know is from the research is an optimal state of mind to be in when trying to conceive. It's, you know, relaxing, you know, being kind of in a parasympathetic response, you know, not activated in a fight or flight way, being, you know, in a state of like rest, like signaling to the body that now is a good time to conceive. So wondering if you have perspectives on for those who are wanting to build a family, if they're at that stage or expand their family, how to harness some of the science around optimism as it relates to trying to conceive and to be, I guess, a little less. There's reasons to be pessimistic about it. There's, you know, we know that things don't always go as we would hope in the journey to becoming a parent. But if you have any, I guess, experience from your own motherhood journey or practical tips that people could tap into as it relates to trying to conceive.
I mean, I think that what I learned very quickly through my own sort of journey into motherhood, and by the way, for me, it was a different journey for all three. And then through my friends and family who have struggled in trying to conceive or their fertility process, is that one thing I wish people knew and understood, and I think a lot of times the ones in it might know, but I hope for the people around supporting, is that trying to conceive and that whole fertility journey is not it's not just a medical journey. It's a psychological, emotional marathon.
Right.
It can be for some people. And it's interesting because yes, all the research shows that, you know, the best time to conceive is when you are in this state of rest. But I just want to make clear for everyone out there, like, how hard it is naturally to be in a state of rest right now in 2025.
Yep. Absolutely.
Just for so many reasons. I mean, when you were saying about fight or flight, like this modern time, and especially for women, we experience the most sensation of fight or flight and in that state than ever before. I mean, in back to sort of the evolutionary process we were talking about, maybe people felt the sense of fight or flight like once every 4 days.
Right.
It was a time to go hunt. Or like, you know, we feel it like minute to minute. Constantly. Our adrenals are fatigued and we are experiencing, you know, really high stress cortisol levels. And I just want to say, like, that's unfortunately of the time, that's the normal response. And so we have to work really hard to come up with tools and come up with boundaries and come up with, you know, what we arm ourselves with to get ourselves into that sort of state, even if we're not trying to conceive, but literally the best way we know how to problem solve and our brain starts, you know, the executive functioning and firing off solutions for problems is from a state of rest or from a state of at least neutrality, and let alone great if you're in a state of joy. But, you know, the amount of stimulation and things that we have to process during our days, I just want to say, if you feel like you are constantly struggling or constantly battling something or constantly in fight or flight and having to work through it, like, you're not alone. It's unfortunately actually the most common state right now.
Yeah.
And so I think it's all the more reason to just understand and be hopeful about the idea that actually being optimistic and optimism is a muscle. So it's something you can practice intentionally.
Yeah.
I think, you know.
And to your point, boundaries may help with that.
Totally. Boundaries make up with that. And I also think that, you know, the whole trying to conceive world is tricky as well, because even if you set everything the way in which you want to set everything, first of all, rarely does anything go your way exactly as you plan it out. And the more you get specific and plan things, it actually instigates your fight or flight. Like and it's hard to tell people to just relax.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
that's
to women
a word.
who are
Yes.
experiencing any sort of struggle along
Yes.
the journey. I think that can be an infuriating thing to hear.
Very
because it can
infuriating,
feel
triggering.
dismissive of course, like if it was that easy, that isn't always the answer.
Right.
And it's not necessarily that easy to just relax when you care so much about, wanting to become a mother.
And all of it, and everybody has different circumstances and things happening in their personal world, in the world in which they fit in, that they live in their community, in the global world.
Yeah.
Like, I think that, but there are things that you can do.
Yeah.
And I think that the piece about it that I think is exciting is that it does feel like empowering to be able to build an intentional practice or to do something that's just for you. And sometimes, and I'm not saying this is a positive thing, but I've seen it in my own life. Sometimes it was easier for me to create those tools or those boundaries when I had an idea of what it was for. I wish more people could just think that they were worth it enough to be able to build those just
Right.
for their own
Without the
lives.
goal in mind.
Without the goal in
Right.
mind. But I think the way in which I was, treating my body or thinking about coming up with boundaries and adding intentional practices into my life to be healthier when I was thinking about having kids, or even when I was, in the new stages of motherhood, we're just so different than right now. I feel like I have a 7-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 1-year-old, and I probably am not doing anything to really keep myself healthy and give myself those periods of rest when you still continuously need it. I think that's a big thing.
Yeah.
We do a lot for the conception period and even the pregnancy period.
Right.
But then everything becomes about, of course, taking care of our baby.
Yeah.
And I see it with
especially
others too.
when you have more than one
multiples,
child.
yes.
It's
And I
just-
see it like the way in which people react. I mean, have you ever seen when there is a pregnant woman or a pregnant person, in line somewhere or at the door, I see, and I noticed it with myself, a lot of people open the door or say like, why don't you sit? Or, and then when you have a child
Right.
who's like on you and went like at the airport or somewhere, like nobody's,
No, they
no
don't
one's
want
helping
you
you
around at all.
no, they're like, they roll their eyes if you're
Yeah.
sitting next to them. And so I think that we get those cues as well from society around us, and we sort of treat ourselves in that way as well. So I think that you could look, and not to be too silver lining about it, but I think that is a great period of time to sort of be able to intentionally, in an empowered way, come up with things that work for you, that give you rest or give you joy. And something I practice with a lot of my clients, it seems really small and silly. By the way, I'm the master of small and silly because I actually secretly inside think that they're huge and not silly, but that is the way to make actual change in people's lives. I have a love-hate relationship with technology, of course, like we all do, but I like to try to use my phone for me. And one of the things I love to use my phone with, and my notes section in my phone, is I have something called a joy list. And anytime I experience the feeling of joy, I like stop and I ask myself what I'm doing, and I jot it down in the joy list. And then when I'm in a moment in my day or week, because I'm in those moments daily or weekly where I'm struggling a bit or feeling like, or even if I'm not struggling, but a call got canceled and I have an extra 3 minutes, or I got early to pick up and I'm in the car and I have an extra, I steal time. I look through my joy list and I think about a thing I can do intentionally to sort of raise my mood state and to sort of give it to myself almost as like a prescription. But in those moments that you struggle, you don't think about, you can't remember, or your brain, the problem solving part of the brain we talked about earlier, can't recall what some of those tools are or the things that might bring you joy. And so if you have them written down and you just say, I know I have my joy list, and you kind of skim through it and see what you can do in that moment. And I think the same could work for something to put you in your restful state and to rest that parasympathetic system. And for me, a lot of that is breathing techniques. I mean, I think scientifically that's one of the best and most effective ways to sort of calm the entire system. I love the 4-7-8 breathing technique. It acts as a reset. It's extremely relaxing and calming and has a lot of research behind it. But you just breathe in for 4. You hold your breath for 7, and then you breathe out for 8. And if you're new to it, you just do it a couple times. And if you can kind of increase that and do that a few times a day, it's truly a reset. I also love this technique that I use with all of my clients, and I use it with myself as well, especially for spiraling or worry spiraling or when you feel stuck. I play basically what I call an adult game of I Spy. And all it does is it is utilizing the right amount of attentional capacity. We don't have unlimited attentional capacity. Our brains have a limited amount. And so if you tell it what to think and you're using enough attentional capacity, then it can't worry or think about all the other stuff. And it acts as sort of this intentional, mindful reset.
That's great.
It works a lot for people that can't just like be told to empty their mind,
right, or
and relax.
Yeah.
So you just go around the room, you set
like
a timer. It's active,
practice.
Which is what I do mostly for myself because I know that is what works for me.
Yeah.
You go around the room and maybe you set a timer. You start with 30 seconds, you work your way up to 60 and so on. And you just start naming things that you see out loud. So being able to clock it in, look at it, and then recall what the name of it is and say it out loud is enough attentional capacity. And that's it. It's the adult I Spy game, and it works wonders.
That's wonderful. That reminds me really of, I think one of the aspects of parenting that does, I guess has shifted my life in a positive way. I agree with you that there are some ways in which my anxiety is higher now as a parent, but I feel like when you are really with your children and you're not on your device, as we all are from time to time, but when you just like observe them and are with them, they are just so present.
Yes.
There is like it's almost like a crowding out technique of like, you can't, to your point, you can't think about the worry or the to-do list if you're really, really present.
Right.
But I find that I really have to like pick that activity. For example, like when I was on maternity leave this past fall and, worrying about the state of our country and things around election time, I wanted to be off social media to be focused on being with the baby and being with my kids and just in a more insular state of mind. But I found that it's hard to just be like, I'm going to stop doing that thing.
Yeah.
Without filling it with something else. So I love that idea. I was using my phone to like brush up on French with Duolingo, just like something to occupy my brain that wasn't negative, wasn't an anxiety spiral, something active. I think that really resonates with me of replacing it with something else.
It works really well with people that are used to being extremely active.
Yeah.
And so, and their minds are very active and constantly flowing. And oftentimes people will say that to me and like it's a negative. And to me, all of us are different. Same with our, conception journey. It's same with motherhood, same with all the pieces of life. We're all unique.
Yeah.
We're all very different. None of it is bad or good or whatever it is. I mean, sometimes it can be. But for me, I just look at it like if you can find something that is working with you, with your brain. So for me, I love to help people understand what the science is because I think that it only empowers them and gives them a leg up into doing something that actually works with the way their brain actually functions. But also just learning for me as, a practitioner, but learning for me uniquely the person I'm with, like how they work. And so instead of me being like, I better rack my brain and try to do this like transcendental meditation, which I wish I could and I would love to, or just practice the idea of emptying my mind, I decided to invest myself more into tools that gave me the same sort of benefit, but worked in a way in which my mind works.
Yeah.
And for me, it's that active meditation or active mindfulness that's really doing something and filling it up with the amount I need to fill it up with.
That's wonderful.
Even when taking a prenatal vitamin, 95% of women are still depleted. Needed's Prenatal delivers up to 16 times more of the critical nutrients women and babies need. Every mother deserves to thrive. This is Needed.
Well, I would love to end with asking you what gives you hope, especially in this moment. when the world feels heavy, when life in LA feels heavy, maybe, your own personal family journey. This is a moment in time that feels heavy. So what's giving you hope?
Honestly, I mean, it sounds so cliche, but I think you can relate because we've kind of touched on it a few times. It's my kids. And, my eldest son said something to me a little while back, and he was having a tough transition. We've had so much disruption, and I won't even get into the details of all of it besides being away and back. But he said to me, I was putting him to bed, and he said, Mom, like the last couple of weeks, my body has been telling me to like cry, but my mind keeps telling me like, no, you don't have to cry because this is not going to always be the same way. And I was like, part of me like felt like crumbling, and I wanted to cry because I still have to get my mind around the idea of allowing my kids to fail or fall or experience struggle, which, by the way, I know as a researcher, that is what they need to be doing. But as a mom, it's really tough. I don't want him to feel sad or going through something that is making him cry. But on the other hand, I was so proud and so hopeful that he had developed this tool.
It's amazing.
Like he was, I wanted to make sure he understood it's okay to cry if you want. But like the fact that he had this like self dialogue that was sort of telling him that this was temporary, and that even I could see in his face that he knew it would get better. It was just like, it made me hopeful. And, my other two kids, they're little, 4 and 1, and there's just so much ahead of them. And I think, to your point, how can you not see these little children, which are the future, and not feel hopeful? Yeah. But I think lastly, the fact that we're having these type of conversations, and these conversations are getting more mainstream and they're normal. Like we're talking about our feelings, we're talking about mental health. We are investing in proactive mental health like optimism, the tools before things get bad, not just as a result or reaction. Like that gives me so much hope. And I think, being able to see that the world on the whole are having these type of conversations and putting sort of their chips in those baskets is very hopeful for me from a professional standpoint and a personal standpoint.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here. It's been wonderful to hear about your work and, how you and your family are doing in these wild times. But thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me.
On the next Needed Conversations.
Well, I might get roasted for this, but this is my personal belief. Take with it what you want.